Wonderful. So welcome everyone. This is our second seminar of our series this semester. So I know most of you know already what's going on. We are a joint initiative between 3 universities and 3 groups. We are collaborating between the research group on collective action, change and transition at the University of Trento in Italy, the Center for Sustainable and Socially Responsible Consumption at Doughnut University, where I am based, and the Environmental Sociology section at the University of Örebro in Sweden. My colleagues are there, so they're going to say hi later when we have the Q&A. So today we're really happy. We have a really interesting topic, and we are really delighted to have Erinch Sahan with us. So I'm just gonna briefly introduce Erinch and then leave the floor to you. So Erinch is the Business and Enterprise Lead at the Doughnut Economics Action Lab. He has been working for more than a decade, I think, on this concept of the transformation of business and this idea of making businesses regenerative and distributive by design. Previously, he was the chief executive of the World Fair Trade Organization. You might know this organization already. It is a global network of social enterprises and cooperatives working on fair trade, and is currently teaching sustainable value chains at Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership. So we're really, really happy to have Erinch with us today, and he's going to talk about this new project. I think it's a quite new initiative, but you're gonna tell us more, of the Doughnut Economics Action Lab. So thank you so much, Erinch, for joining us, and I'll leave the floor to you.
Thank you, Roberta, and wonderful to see you again, and wonderful to see everyone here from across the universities and groups that are part of this initiative. It's very encouraging to see this kind of collaboration in the world of academia. So I'm going to speak for about sort of 30, 35, 40 minutes, depending on how things go, and we're going to have hopefully quite an interesting and an insightful discussion on the back of this, around what we mean by enterprise design, how we've taken this concept of doughnut economics into the world of business, and I'll take you on a bit of a journey that is around the concepts, but also the practice that is beginning to emerge on this. So I'm going to begin to share my screen, and hopefully it will show the correct screen as there we go. No, let me just switch these over and we'll have the correct one. So lovely to see you all. As I mentioned, I'm Erinch Sahan and I work at Doughnut Economics Action Lab. And just to reiterate the journey that brought me into this, as Roberta mentioned as well, it's been a bit of a journey. I've been sort of working on sustainability, I guess, for nearly 2 decades, but have begun that journey back 20 years ago in the consumer goods industry in Australia, in Sydney, before moving over to working on smallholder issues, on value chains issues, and how to integrate farmers, particularly in Indonesia, but also other parts of the developing world, into global supply chains in a way that's effective. And I was working in government in that capacity before moving to Oxfam for 7 years. And in Oxfam, I led various campaigning initiatives, various enterprise development projects to support mostly farmers and rural people to build businesses that are social enterprises and cooperatives, but also to try to campaign for change in global supply chains, before most recently leading the World Fair Trade Organization, where I got the privilege to work for hundreds of social enterprises who practice fair trade around the world. And I moved to the Doughnut Economics Action Lab, which is a fast emerging community. It's a community that has got quite a bit of practice that's beginning to emerge, because the Doughnut Economics as a book was written, what, 6 years ago now. So that's the book by Kate Rayworth, my colleague, and also former colleague. We worked at Oxfam together more than 10 years ago, when she was coming up with the concept of doughnut economics. But since the publication of the book, action has sort of, been generated around the world at a city level, at neighborhood level, at country and national level. and a community has emerged of change makers that are beginning to sort of embrace these ideas and take them forward. And that community is creating tools, it's creating stories, it's creating collaborations, initiatives. And we at Doughnut Economics Action Lab are trying to support that by creating concepts and tools that they can use to take the ideas of Doughnut economics into the world. So that's sort of a bit of a background to what brings us here. Now to the concept of Doughnut economics. It might be new to some of you, for others, you might have heard of it already, but it emerged because we looked at the 21st century and realized it's been a century of crises. It started with the financial meltdown in 2008. We've had increasing climate breakdowns. We're beginning to see a lot of protest crackdowns where people who are trying to defend the rights of nature and also our living world are beginning to feel the limitations of what's possible, and as well as the COVID lockdowns that have emerged as well, all of which demonstrate bigger change, more transformation of the economy is needed. And in response to this, we propose a donut, which is what we call a compass for human prosperity. On the outside, there's a boundary. That boundary is created by the 9 planetary boundaries that Earth system scientists have determined we must not transgress. These are things like climate change, but also ocean acidification, also land conversion, biodiversity loss, chemical pollution. There are these delicately balanced aspects of the living world that we must respect, and we must make sure that we are not in overshoot of. That's important because that delicate balance is what keeps our ability to live on this planet as a successful and thriving society alive. However, it's not just about the planet's boundaries. We also have to create economies that provide life's essentials for everybody on it. So there is an inner boundary as well. We cannot just shrink our economy and our economic footprint to a point where we are no longer providing food, water, health, education, income, etc. And we need those as well. And those we've drawn from the Sustainable Development Goals, the social parts of the Sustainable Development Goals. So an outer planetary ceiling, an ecological ceiling that comes from the science of Earth system scientists, and an inner social foundation that comes from the agreed goals that the Earth's governments, planet's governments have come together to say, look, we must achieve these for everybody on it. And together, those two boundaries create a space that looks a bit like a donut. And it's a safe and just space for humanity. And it's a space that we call is regenerative. So it works with and within the cycles of the living world, and it's distributive. So it is creating and sharing value far more equitably with everybody who has co-created that value. And I'm going to go into those concepts a little bit and what that means for the world of business in a little bit, but that's the vision. So how are we doing on this vision? Well, we are out of balance. We are both in overshoot of many of our planet's boundaries, especially the ones we can measure. Some of these that are in gray here, air pollution and chemical pollution, for instance, weren't measurable at the time of publication of this. We've since figured out how to calculate chemical pollution, and that too is in red. So a new donut will be created soon. But that red on the outside is us transgressing, getting into overshoot on our planet's boundaries. However, we're also falling short on life's essentials for hundreds of millions of people around the world. And that red on the inside is us falling short of that. So something is out of balance. We look at this and think of it as a collective selfie that we've created. This is what we now know about the society and economy that we've created, what it results in, what it leads to. We can also drill down to a national level to look at what this looks like at a national level. And the story here also is a clear story that emerges. It's that the higher income countries of the world are using far more, obscenely more in some cases, than their fair share of the Earth's resources, and are in significant overshoot of planetary boundaries. But also the world's developing countries, or the global, what's called global South countries, lower income countries, they're actually not using their fair share but are in even greater shortfall on life's essentials for their populations. So when we look at this, what we see is that actually every country is a developing country. Every country is in a state of transformation, or is in a state of development into an economy that can work with and within the cycles of the living world and provide life's essentials for everybody in their country. So no matter who we swap over, this analysis was done by the project Good Life, which is hosted by the University of Leeds, and my colleagues have been part of that for a number of years. But no matter who we swap in, a similar picture emerges where across the world, no country is in the donut. No country is living within the means of our living planet. The country that comes closest and doesn't quite meet there, but comes closest is Costa Rica, but that too is not quite within the donut. So picture is clear, every nation must transform. Now, what's driving this? I mentioned some of these concepts already, but let's begin by what the current problem is. And it's a degenerative model of production, of trade and consumption that takes from Earth resources, makes things, uses things, then loses things. And this process is repeated over and over again. Now, this, of course, is something that can't be sustained over the long term, is not something that can be the bedrock of our economies, and we need to shift away from it. We're beginning to see in the business world ways that this is emerging. And of course, many of you know about the circular economy and concepts of going circular and circularity. And of course, that's going to be critical to making sure that we have a regenerative economy that works with and within the cycles of the living world. And that is for the biological materials, a regenerative loop, the technical materials, the human-made ones, a restorative loop, and together we can design out waste or out of our systems. So those are some of the ideas that we're beginning to see, and as a result, we're beginning to see some significant new ideas emerge along both of these. One of these ways of explaining and thinking about the kind of ambition we need is to look to the journey from degenerative, those take, make, use, lose model that we've seen, that leads us through reducing harm, maybe eliminating harm on our planet. Like a lot of the ideas around sustainability are focused on reducing harm, and getting all the way to regenerative, which is actually creating positive loops and positive contributions and benefits. Now, this might feel a bit confronting to look at sustainability as not the destination, and that it's actually a stepping stone to getting to regenerative. But here's why we've placed regenerative on that side. It's taken from a lot of the ideas of biomimicry, the ideas of looking at nature and looking at the way it designs and looking at the way it creates benefits. There is no waste in nature. Nothing is waste. Every output of one thing is an input to another. There is a way of restoring and creating benefits to each other. And one of the questions we ask when we work with cities or businesses is, how could you be as generous as the wildland next door? So if your factory, your office, your building, your structure, your local society, community, if it weren't there and there was nature instead, that nature would be sequestering carbon. It would be cleaning the groundwater. It would be cleaning the air. It would be providing nutrients for the soil. It will be cooling the area through trees, sometimes 7 degrees cooler on the hottest summer days, local mammals and species. It would be creating these benefits. Nature doesn't do zero harm. Nature does benefits. And how can we design into our economic model and ideas those benefits that nature provides? So that could look for us, if we look at landscape degradation and getting to zero deforestation, all the way to restoring that landscape. So how could business and farming and agriculture use land in a way that restores it, that replenishes the nutrients, that creates those positive benefits, not just eliminates new deforestation? Or if we look at issues like built-in obsolescence where products are thrown out, well, how could we move beyond recycling of products and instead design products so that they're repairable or that they are modular, which means that they have a much longer life cycle? And that's the kind of thinking that's beginning to emerge in the regenerative side. So I know that the term regenerative has been sort of co-opted by some businesses and some people, but actually what we're trying to do here is to bring back some of the original meaning of the word of being regenerative, because there's a lot of inspiration in there that comes from nature. So that's the ecological side, but that's not the only side to consider here. We also have the social side. So here it's about how do we go from a divisive economy where there's been spiraling and unhealthy extreme amounts of inequality to one where we are much more distributive, where we're sharing opportunity and value far more equitably with all who have co-created it. And similarly here, there's a journey, and that journey passes through inclusivity. So it starts with a model which is currently divisive, for instance, poverty wages. We get to being inclusive, including people so that at least they're meeting their basic needs, a living wage, which is, by the way, very ambitious currently in our economic system for many people around the world to even get to a living wage. So they're just making enough, just enough for their basic needs. But how do we design with the level of ambition needed to have a thriving society and a balanced planet? Well, we would actually go far beyond a living wage, and we would design businesses, business models, supply chains, value distribution models that also share value with workers, farmers, and all who have contributed. So the upside and the additional value, you don't get to just the bare minimum. You find a way to distribute out to those who've co-created that value, like we're beginning to see currently with some ideas emerging in employee ownership and hybrid models and steward ownership models, etc., which I'll go into separately. But also it manifests in the way that businesses engage with each other. So it's not just about this hyper competition of aggressive, enforcement of patents, for instance, or getting to a level of partnerships, which are encouraging, but also not the end goal, but going all the way to some of the more advanced ideas we're beginning to see, like open source design. So Drupal in the technology sector is an open source product that's been co-created. In the fashion sector, we have examples like Houdini, which has circular product design for its garments that it's manufacturing, but it makes all those designs open source so that others in its sector, others in the industry can use those ideas, build on them. The idea isn't to get to a hyper competitive state where they take over the entire market. They're trying to solve a problem, so others need to collaborate and have access to the knowledge that they have created. So open source or living wage and profit share, the kind of ideas that go from merely being inclusive, which is a goal that is important currently, but going beyond and into distributive and being able to share a lot more of the upside and change the very core of some of our economic interactions. So within this, what is stopping business? I mean, over the last year and a half, we did 22 different workshop series with groups of businesses around the world. Over 300 businesses participated in these workshops that I ran, representing the Doughnut Economics Action Lab. We did this together with lots of organizations around the world, business networks, startup hubs, other communities of entrepreneurs, etc. And what we found is some common threads. We found that, for instance, certain things are blocking companies who know about modular product design. I mean, Fairphone has been around for over a decade. We know that we can create phones that are modular, but businesses are deciding not to do it. We know about the living wage. Some businesses are creating huge profits, but are deciding not to pay a living wage to their workers or prices that would enable a living wage in their supply chains. What's stopping these sorts of actions? Well, part of it has been outdated processes or rigid financial targets, as I'll explain in a second, or in the way margins operate or capital expenditure works, short-term thinking, culture of hierarchy. These are some of the characteristics and traits that came out in our work. And what we saw with the businesses that were able to push the envelope and push the frontiers of what's possible is that what they were doing is they were often exhibiting these traits. So they were suspending practicality. They were demonstrating broader perspectives on business. They were demonstrating longer term thinking, a culture of courage. The first one here is really important. And we built a toolkit that allows any business leader or people working with businesses, consultants, networks, advisors, etc., to help create ideas that go beyond what is currently possible. Because if we just limit our ideas to what is possible only today, then we're not able to see the kind of enterprise designs we need to unlock the ideas of the future. Here's what we mean, what I mean by this, and this is an actual activity we run with companies around the world. So we ask them to think about visualizing that thriving future. So think about the donut, think about everything we just talked about, becoming regenerative, becoming distributive. And in that, think about how this is a necessity. If we want to live on a planet that is thriving, that is safe, secure, and able to sustain human life, and safe, secure, stable societies within that planet, we have to get regenerative and distributive. These are the sort of the difficult challenges of our time. Well, if that economy is going to need to exist in the future, we ask them to think, well, how will your business belong to that future? What are the ideas that you'll need to now take on to pursue that goal of belonging to that future? And critically, what will your business now need to start doing? So what we'll need to do differently or begin to do in kind of products and services and practices and behaviors, strategies and investments. But what will it also need to stop doing? Will it need to discontinue particular products that are maybe harmful for human health and use scarce ecological resources? Will it need to move away from certain clients that maybe have negative impacts on our planet? Will it need to change something significant? And in doing so, we ask them to think as ambitiously as possible. Now, the next level is we then say, well, this is you as a business leader that's beginning to have these ideas. But let's also think about who else isn't in the room, who might need a voice, who might need a presence in this discussion. And here we ask them to also bring in the voice and the perspectives of, for instance, the living planet. What if the forests had a voice? What if the rivers and air and soil had a voice, and you could embody their perspective? By the way, we've got governance mechanisms to do this. The company Faith in Nature recently put nature on its board. It put the organization Lawyers for Nature on their board as a voting member of its board. And their perspective is to represent the views and interests of nature. So we could do that. We can embody this. We can find innovative ways to at least bring that into the conversation. What about your employees or your customers or supply chain workers who often get left out of these discussions? What about activists? What would Extinction Rebellion say if they were in the room, or a human rights advocacy group say? What about local communities and importantly, future generations? What would they say of your ideas for how to belong to this future economy and the kind of ideas you'll need to pursue? We ask about industry leaders, what they're doing, what's pushing the envelope. What about junior colleagues, technical experts? And what would all these, so if you're thinking future generations, what would they make of your excuses for not taking on the kind of practices you know you need to take on? And here we ask them to particularly go beyond what's currently feasible, what's currently practical, because some of these big ideas will not be practical today. They will need to be practical in the future, and you'll need to plan for that, and also to focus on where there's greatest impact. So what we found is that once they do this, they come up with big ideas. They come up with, companies, factories that sequester carbon. Let's take inspiration from nature. Let's not just reduce our carbon, emissions, but let's actually go all the way to sequestering carbon. Let's not just reduce the amount of pollution that is in the water that we pump out after we use the water in our manufacturing processes, or even eliminate the pollution, but let's actually clean the water as it comes through. The water is cleaner after it goes through our processes than it was when we brought it in, the way that nature would if we were to take inspiration from that. Let's go beyond the living wage. Let's pay a double living wage to everybody in our supply chain. Let's have those supply chain contracts and arrangements and prices and practices that enable that to happen. So those sorts of ideas, you put them on the table, and what comes up is that we find that there's a limitation to those ideas. Of course there is. Of course they're not. It's not because these ideas don't occur to people. It's because there is a design problem. There is an impediment within the business itself. And here are some of the things we've heard, and I've heard over the years when we put these ideas forward. So if we look at the tea industry, I heard a senior executive say that paying tea pluckers a living wage cannot mean paying suppliers more for their tea. This market just won't reward this. They need to fund it by raising productivity. This is actually a very common perspective we hear, whether it's in coffee, tea, global agriculture. A lot of the time, people don't touch the price. Let's work on productivity. If farmers can make more and get a better price that way, that's how we get to a living income or a living wage. We heard from a senior executive at a major beauty brand, a beauty brand that's leading in many ways, very large, global, multinational, publicly listed beauty brand. And they talk about how they've got very ambitious net zero commitments. What they found is that in order to meet those net zero commitments, they need to move away from single-use products. And this is what the senior executive told me. We should introduce refillable perfume bottles, but bringing consumers on board needs investment, and the payback period on that capital expenditure is too long. So the processes for enabling the investment internally are holding back the actions and strategies that they know they have to take on. We met another head of innovation at a major clothing brand who told us, I've been asked to create a range of regenerative clothing while being expected to deliver the usual 15% profit margins from the outset. This is impossible. Now, again and again, we hear these ideas, we hear these issues, and too often sustainability has sort of not gone into the realm of finance and money. It doesn't want to talk about money. It doesn't want to talk about margins and prices and internal investment and capital expenditure. It often leaves that for the big discussions of corporate leadership. But those are the structures that are enabling or holding back the kind of action that we need from the business world. So we're bringing that in. We're bringing that in. That's what we mean by enterprise design. There's other aspects of this as well. And the reason that we think it's critical to open up this box of enterprise design is that when we look at the commons and public services and NGOs and charities and community organizations, we often see that there are designs in there that are allowing and enabling regenerative and distributive goals. But when we look at business as usual, what we see is that it's designed to maximize margins and to maximize dividends. And that severely limits what's possible. That means that you can only do the regenerative and distributive things if it is a way to get to maximum margins and maximum dividends. So the question then is, why not redesign business so that it is allowed and equipped and enabled to pursue those ideas that are regenerative and distributive? And that's what the theme of this next part of my talk is going to be. But before I move on, I also want to acknowledge that the redesigning business is not the only lever of change we have. There's lots of levers of change. We can exert public pressure. We can have new regulations, new ways of governing from the government that will be critical here. We can have collective action by workers, but through unions, for instance. We can have collective action by farmers and community organizations. So exerting public pressure is going to be also a part of it, but that's not the focus of this talk. Of course, enlightened leadership, people who are benevolent and positive and progressive in their leadership is going to be important. Setting new targets, better targets for businesses and metrics and impact measurements is going to be critical. Making the business case, making sure that they are beginning to realize that their own social license to operate longer term might rely on this. And actually, this might be better for the business long term to think in a way that is regenerative and distributive. All of these are great. They're fantastic. Lots of people are working on these sorts of levers of change around the world. But to reinforce these and to drive further ambition, Doughnut Economics focuses on transforming the deep design of business. If we can have businesses that are pursuing regenerative and distributive goals while operating in the market, then they can lean in and support the kinds of regulations that will help get the entire market there. They will support the leaders that have much more enlightened, progressive ideas. They will lean into more ambitious targets and metrics and accompany them with the strategies needed. And they will embrace the business case for doing this. So having a design that is focused on being regenerative and distributive will be critical. And what do we mean by this? I mean, by enterprise design, here is the framework that we use. It's looking at the purpose, the networks, the governance, the ownership, and the finance of business. And we've worked with, engaged, and drawn from the author and theorist Marjorie Kelly's work, who looks at enterprise design, works a lot on different kind of ownership structures for business, different kind of governance models. And essentially what we're saying is, how do we move from that 20th century model of being degenerative and divisive that asks how much value can we extract through this enterprise? And how do we move to the 21st century version of this question that should underlie business, which asks how many benefits can we generate through this enterprise? So I'm going to take you through a very quick tour of these 5 design layers of purpose, networks, governance, ownership, and finance. And essentially, purpose is about why does the business exist, and how is this purpose not just written down? Every business now is having a great wordsmith purpose statement, but how is that purpose manifested in the operations of the business, in the supply chain of the business, in its relationship with customers, in its products, in its services, and how is it able to pursue that purpose most ambitiously? The example we contrast in our paper and tool, for instance, is fast fashion, which is about producing as much as possible, as quick as possible, for as cheap as possible. Certain things are possible within that business model, but it is limiting. It is absolutely a straitjacket on the kind of social and ecological purpose that a business might need to pursue. However, we're beginning to see emerging models of business like Manos del Uruguay, which is a multi-million-dollar business that has come out of Uruguay, has been in existence since 1968, co-owned by 12 different women producer organizations across the country, producing high-quality garments that are sold in Champs-Élysées, that are sold in Madison Avenue. But critically here, they practice, they use natural fibers, they share their profits back with their community, and they are focused on their social and ecological purpose. It's a vastly different way of embedding purpose into the business than, say, many fast fashion companies. Next, we look at networks. So this is all about relationships that the business holds with different stakeholders, with its customers, with its suppliers, staff, with governments, communities, partners, etc. And a lot of the examples that we use are about supply chains, but of course, it's not just about the relationships with the supply chain. It's that, there are service companies that don't have substantive supply chains as well. And there are still significant relationships, for instance, with government. Is it focused on tax avoidance in the old style, or is it focused on fair tax, paying a fair share of tax, which is emerging? Companies like Lush are paying their fair share of tax. They're actively looking to do that. Are they part of a regressive lobby groups that argue against and try to stop regulations that will even the playing field and create a much more effective market regulation? Or are they part of progressive networks and progressive lobby groups that are arguing for instance, action on human rights, action on climate change? The example we provide here is the German company El Puente, which has got an interesting co-ownership model among many of its stakeholders, including its workers, but also includes its supply chain. So its supply chain meets regularly, elects a representative, and they sit on the board of El Puente. They're co-owners of El Puente. And when crises hit, for instance, when COVID-19 hit, what we noticed is that the behavior is significantly different. They have a long-term partnership, long-term relationship with their suppliers. Next, we go to governance. And governance is about rules of decision-making. It's around, the model of how power is distributed within the business, but it's also about the company's culture, the company's processes for decisions, the metrics of success, how transparent the business is. And here it's about going from the governance being in service of finance to the governance being in service of a purpose. The example we provide here is River Simple from Wales, which is a hydrogen car company, but it's got a fascinating future guardianship model of governance. So its board has got different representatives from different stakeholders sitting there, including the planet, including customers, including the community, workers, but also investors and commercial partners. So it's internalizing into the board the different stakeholders that need to have custodians within the decision making of the company. And then ownership, and of course ownership is pivotal. A lot of these ideas overlap with one another. Ownership can determine governance, it can determine finance, networks, purpose, for instance. but it's about being deliberate and shaping ownership so that it is in line with the purpose. What are the interests and expectations of owners? To what extent can the owners change or undermine the intended purpose of the business, for instance? Here, the example we provide is the recent ownership transformation that Patagonia underwent. Now, what's interesting about this is that it created two separate share classes. So half of its shares sit with a group that holds all of the dividend rights of the company. So the profits go to this group, but they have none of the voting rights. They have no governance power. The other half of the shares go to people or an organization that holds all the governance rights, but none of the dividend rights. And that's a foundation that has the purpose of the business and built into the foundation. So essentially, by separating money and power within the ownership model, it's allowing a far more ambitious pursuit of its purpose, because there isn't anybody there that pushes the company to increase returns, increase dividends, and to make it harder sometimes to invest into its purpose internally. It's by separating the two, it's able to align its ownership model. And it'll be interesting to see what is possible for Patagonia as a result of this ownership shift. And lastly, we look at finance. And here it's about the model of finance that shapes and dictates decision-making in a company. How are margin expectations and dividend expectations determined, and how rigidly are they enforced? What are the rules for allowing reinvestment within the company? What's considered a fair return for investors? All of these ideas ultimately shape how decision makers in companies are able to act and able to pursue certain ideas. The example here we provide is, for instance, the Body Shop, which brought in a partnership with Plastics for Change that enabled them to be the first major fair trade plastic recycling program initiative. What was interesting is that they had far more flexible approach to their financial parameters, and were also able to ensure they had a broader approach to the concept of financial value. Now that allowed for the kind of patience, the kind of support, the kind of partnership approach that allowed that partnership to work, that allowed the social enterprise Plastics for Change to successfully integrate waste pickers across India into the program in a way that upheld their dignity. So those are some of the ideas that sort of underpin purpose, networks, governance, ownership, and finance. And as with all models, I think it was George Box that said all models are wrong, but some are useful. And we think this is a useful way to go through and explore the DNA of business, the deep design of business. But it also has other benefits because it helps to align the internal processes, for instance, product design processes, with the purpose of the business. It helps ensure that new partnerships and engaging stakeholders is possible and is built into the design of the business. Imagine in the future when there is a security of supply issue on cocoa, on coffee, on cotton, those businesses that are brought in, those farmer cooperatives or local suppliers into their design, into their board, into their ownership structure in some way, in new innovative ways, they're going to have that sort of stability of partnership, stability of supply chain, and security of supply chain longer term. But also redesigning deliberately like this allows businesses to invest into the transformative ideas that they need. So to channel aspects, parts of their profit and bring in the right kind of finance to support their long-term vision. And critically, it helps to lock in the legacy, protect the mission of a business. We've seen a lot of businesses over time lose their mission, lose their purpose because the design of the business didn't protect its core purpose. There's been a lot that have been taken over by major corporations that have undermined some of the early commitments of social enterprises or socially minded entrepreneurs that founded the business. And this is an important aspect of building in that kind of protection. But most importantly, it's about becoming regenerative and distributive by design. It's about belonging to that future economy and being ready and paving the way to shaping that future economy appropriately. Now, to go through all of this, we created a tool that we call Doughnut Design for Business. It's essentially a workshop that anybody can run. It's in the Creative Commons. So there are some responsibilities we ask for people who are using this tool with businesses, with clients, with others, to make sure they're using the ideas with integrity and upholding the ambition and integrity of the concepts. But essentially, this tool is a step-by-step way of allowing people to explore the ideas I just presented and asking essentially two major questions at the heart of this. On the left-hand side, how does the design of your business block transformative action? And how could a redesign of your business unlock transformative action? Now, this isn't necessarily a particularly normative approach. We're trying to be pragmatic of saying, if you want to belong in the donut, then you're going to need to pursue these regenerative distributive actions. Currently, your deep design holds back some of these actions. So let's redesign to unlock and enable these actions. So it's very much about, the logic of saying, if you want to pursue these ideas, then you'll have to design your business and transform the design of your business appropriately. I'll put the link in the chat after I finish speaking. There's also a taster tool as well, which is a shorter version. So this one, the link to it, which is 191 tools-191. That one is around 5 hours for a facilitator to go through different activities, and there are canvases that people can use to do this. There's a shorter one, a taster tool, which is roughly 2 hours for people to go through. It's got 2 parts and 2 core activities within it. So those are all available. We also have a policy tool as well for policymakers to think about the kind of policies they'll need to generate to redefine and redesign the businesses in their jurisdictions. So we've got, I'm going to jump through those, sorry. To remind you, we created this with these organizations together. So 22 sort of pilot workshop series with different organizations around the world that represented different kind of businesses, some large, some small, different sectors, products, services, etc. We also created it so that it can be used by lots of different individuals, business schools included, or those in universities that work with businesses. So we've got currently now a group of business schools that they've created a LinkedIn page. They've got sort of some regular calls, for instance, who are looking at integrating or beginning already to integrate this thinking around donut economics and donut design for business into their business education, as well as into their research. There's efforts as well to create some special issues of journals to focus on transforming the design of business and studying how different kind of enterprise designs enable or block certain kinds of actions and strategies from businesses. But here, there's a list of organizations in action. So these are some of the organizations that are already incorporating the tool into their work. So they're using it with different businesses coming through their incubator or accelerator. They're using it with their clients if they're a consultancy. We've got some rules around what kind of consultancies can use it. Some of the very large global consultancies, for instance, unless they have a mission primacy legal form, that they're not able to use it, but the smaller ones can, as long as they demonstrate some values alignment with us, and there's a process there as well. And this is my last page, just to remind you, this is the bigger picture and the work that we are doing. So I'll post some of those links in the chat. You can see there are some questions and comments I haven't read yet that have already accumulated as well in the chats, but I'll pause there, and Roberta, we can hopefully have a nice discussion.
Yes, thank you so much, Erinch. So much to unpack and discuss, and I see there have been already many questions coming up in the chat. There has been some enthusiasm, and I'm really excited about this. I think this framework really offers a pathway to transform the design of business that really can be, let's say, relatively easy to apply and understand. Of course, it requires a radical change of values. That's probably less easy, but yeah, I think it's a really, really exciting tool that we can all reflect on how to use, and also in our relationship with the business we cooperate with when it comes to research. So yeah, thank you so much for that. I was going through the questions in the chat. So anyone who wants to unmute and ask their questions directly, please feel free to do so. Otherwise, I'll also go through the questions. I remember the first one was by Sunkanya, and there was a question related to the circular economy. So whether you shared already something about that, but maybe you could just deepen this point a bit more? What is the relationship between the circular economy and the Doughnut model?
Sure, thanks, Roberta, and thank you, Sukanya. Absolutely, the circular economy model is a part of the Doughnut thinking. It's a very central part of it, particularly on the ecological side of things. We focus quite a bit on making sure that it's not just the ecological, but the social as well. So we bring in some additional perspectives on that, as well as taking in broader thinking from, as I mentioned, biomimicry, for instance, which is a concept and an idea that tries to draw inspiration from nature and from the way that nature designs to create the stability and thriving sort of approach that we see in the natural world. So I would sort of highlight that it's a part of it. It's not the only part. Because there are some broader aspects of biomimicry and social ideas as well that are incorporated into this. And the oh, sorry, Roberta, you're on mute, but I saw the second question I was going to jump into from Valentina as well.
Please go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, I was going to say absolutely. So all the content slides I just presented actually are available in the tool. So in fact, if you don't mind, Valentina, I'll quickly just show the tool itself so that people can see what it is and how to navigate it. Because I think you can run this, for instance, as a workshop. You don't need to register or anything. Just use it. You can run this with your students if you're working with business school students or students that are interested in business in some way. So it's all here. All the slides I presented. It's kind of got it's a part of this. If you go to view the tool as Google Slides, you can download it as a PowerPoint. You can use it directly from here. So it's all in the Creative Commons for you to use. And we've also got in here, so all of these presentations, all the ideas that I presented are all here, and as well as some of the activities and canvases. So, we've got activities on mapping on the Doughnut. Then there are activities on looking at some of the ideas and how to look at enterprise design. So all of those are available as PDFs to download as activity canvases, as well as a Miro board for you to use if you're doing an online workshop as well. So all the links are in there. I posted the main links to the two tools, long and the short version, in the chat. But if you go into it and you open it up, you'll see lots of hyperlinks. You'll see lots of concepts across here, examples, case studies, and also at the end some guidance as well for how to run the workshop. So hopefully this is a helpful way for you to go through. So here are the canvases, for instance, you can go straight to the Miro board through that link. You can click here to do the PDFs, etc. And the slides themselves are all available as well.
Yes, wonderful. I'll also have a look at the resources and see whether I can use them. Maybe. Yeah, I think questions are piling up. So I feel the next one was by Stefan. There were a few questions. So I was wondering if Stefan, you would like maybe to unmute and
thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. So I really enjoyed the pragmatic, forward-looking nature of the framework, but also knowing the business world. There are certain words or recommendations that may trigger some thought processes, and especially doing away with intellectual property rights is like a no-go for many. So I just wondered, how have you been going about those ideas that may evoke this strong perception that some socialist revolution is going on? And how did you work with that in your training sessions?
So the way we're rolling this out and the way we developed this in working with business leaders, CEOs of major listed companies, etc., was to firstly, we don't talk about any of the isms of the 20th century. We feel like there's a lot of baggage around those debates. It doesn't convince anybody to go from one ism to another ism, whatever our personal beliefs are. It felt like a lot of them also, people define them differently in their heads. So talking about socialism or capitalism, you know, people are holding different definitions of what these things are in their heads while they're debating in a cross-purposes way. So trying to, you know, delve into that felt counterproductive. And instead we worked on, well, let's begin with the donut as a starting point. And if we all agree this is actually not particularly ideological, that the planet does have boundaries, whatever you think about actions to change this, very few people disagree that of course we have boundaries. We can't, it's not endless, the planet's resources and boundary. And of course, everyone, whatever ideology they have, think, well, we should achieve life's essentials for everybody on it. So if we begin there, it's relatively unideological. It's relatively a statement of fact. Some people might dispute it, but by and large, that's been the case. And then we ask them about how their business will belong to that economy of the future that lives within the donut, and then what they'll need to do to belong to that future. And then we're in a practical starting place that isn't asking, are you this, isn't that, isn't. We're saying, okay, here are the actions you want to take. You actually do want to have long-term relationships with your suppliers. You do want to move from built-in obsolescence to modular product design. You do want to drastically reduce your negative impacts and have some positive impacts on ecology or local communities. These are, you know, people on the far right of neoliberal business management, as well as people on other parts of the political spectrum, won't disagree with some of these things. They'll say, yeah, we're possible. Let's do it. Okay, let's make it possible. How would it look? Like, ownership is not something that is a rule of nature. Like, the shareholder wealth maximization is not, you know, a rule of nature. We could design this differently. There are different ownership models that are in the market economy that operate effectively. There are different governance models. We're not saying use any of those. We're not saying become a cooperative. We're not saying make the workers your owners, or you decide. If those are your goals, what would be the ownership model you will need to evolve into? So it's kind of about opening the conversation around the options and possibilities. And when people realize, actually, I have endless possibilities for all of these. These are design decisions that I just neglected and I just ignored. Then we're in a more fruitful place, I think. And it becomes less ideological, more practical, but also we can make more headway with those who otherwise don't engage with these ideas as much.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Next, we have a question by Juliet Summers, who's asking, do you think that the community wealth building approach goes far enough to meet the requirements of the Doughnut model?
I think, yeah, community wealth building has been one of the things that we point to. We've seen this happen at different places in an effective way, and we've been inspired by it. So it is a part of it. It's a bit more about working with, so what you heard from me is our work with businesses. We have a whole different strand of work with cities that's actually far more advanced. Working with the mayors of Amsterdam and Copenhagen and Cape Town, and, you know, people and smaller cities as well around the world. And there's a much broader approach. And of course, community wealth building is often one of the approaches that are deployed in some of those places where it makes sense and where there's an appetite by local communities. So overall, I mean, I wouldn't want to critique or summarize other approaches that already have got a broad perspective. I've seen, you know, critiques of community wealth building around what about the global impacts, and I would just say that our approach, we use something called the 4 lenses when we're working with communities and places. So when there's place-based work, we use an approach called 4 lenses that asks ecological and social questions from both a local perspective and the global perspective. So it's not just what is your impact on local social outcomes, what is your impact on global social outcomes, and that bringing that global aspect feels like an important addition that sometimes some people might say is missing from approaches like community wealth building. It's not necessarily missing. It's just something that's not always as emphasized. But overall, I think it is kind of transformative idea that can be really powerful It works on employee ownership and supporting local ownership models and cooperatives and other social solidarity enterprise models, which is very much aligned with some of this that I'm presenting. It works with aligning social procurement and local and the kind of partnerships between procurement agencies in different anchor institutions locally, incredibly aligned with what we're trying to achieve. So overall, it's one of those ideas that feels like is in a very similar direction of travel that we would promote and underline.
Wonderful. And I will just jump in here. Do you see any potential for cooperation among all these different initiatives? Because there's a wealth of approaches that I feel are working towards similar goals, probably also with similar values, but maybe they're all each doing their own individual things. So how do you see in the future these different initiatives cooperating? And you also come from the Fair Trade Board, which is another global movement that is working on different but also overlapping objectives. So yeah, do you see any potential there to achieve more cooperation?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, Roberta. I think it is happening already, and we could do more. Overall, we've been careful not to create a new movement. Like we want to, and what we ask people to do is don't create a movement around donut economics, join the movements that exist and bring donut economics in to help with the existing objectives. So that's the community that's emerged on the Doughnut Economics Action Lab website, on the platform, for instance. Mostly takes that approach of focusing in on trying to and the same people are often a part of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance group, or they might be part of local fair trade towns campaigning. They might be part of other initiatives, you know, community wealth building. So I think at a grassroots and local level, it's often the same people anyway that are integrating and using concepts. And where this is, our tools are helpful, our concepts are helpful, people use it alongside other things.
Yeah, I definitely see the value in this, in proposing a tool and a framework, and then using it to join other movements. I definitely see the value in this. Monica, I see your question next. I was wondering whether you'd be happy to unmute and maybe say hi to Erinch.
Yes, hi. Thank you so much for this interesting presentation. I was wondering, I mean, I really like that you focus on the potential and possibilities for change, but I was wondering whether you would like to discuss a bit how you see this lock-in of the ownership structure in large businesses at the moment, and that they are also listed on stock markets and then locked into this, and also like unions and states are even locked into this logic through their pension funds and such capital that is invested just for gaining return. So we have this rationale. I mean, what are the businesses saying? Are they locked into this, or do we need to see new companies emerge and take over?
Yeah, this is maybe the $1 million question, Monica. I completely agree. This and I grapple with this a lot, you know, day to day is, you know, how are we going to transform an economy that is pretty focused on growing capital as fast as possible, as much as possible, and has created institutions and governance models and market systems to facilitate that. So it rewards the companies that are going to grow its capital the most, and it gives it the most power and gives it the lowest risk. That I think you're right is inherent in a lot of the financial markets. Certainly is absolutely explicit in financial markets, but also inherent in other market systems as well. I mean, overall, we have engaged with some larger companies that are publicly listed. We've worked with them. There are changes possible within that system as well. I mean, before Paul Polman left Unilever, one of the things, and this was after he fought off the acquisition, the hostile acquisition bid, he successfully fought it off from 3G Capital and from Warren Buffett and others that tried to buy out the company, take control, strip away some of its sustainability commitments in order to increase profits of Unilever. what he started doing, has been doing it for a while before that as well, was to increase employee ownership, increase the number of shares owned by workers that can help make sure that it is aligned with some of the longer term focus. There are ways that a lot of private companies are being bought out by trusts that are borrowing money that are owned by the workers. So that, and then over time, as they pay back the loan, the business becomes an employee-owned business that is managed on their behalf. This model is expanding. In fact, has got some tax advantages to doing this in the US and the UK currently, for instance, among other places. We're seeing some growth of what they call the silver tsunami businesses that are going through a generational shift and beginning to move over. So I think within the system, there are mechanisms that can help create this. I don't have a simple answer to how do we wrestle with, the public markets, the financial capital markets that are locked into a particular logic. I think generally we're trying to demonstrate how much that holds back what is possible and help foster these new alternatives that are emerging. But at some point, I think we're going to need some significant policy change that will not just regulate the market differently, but we'll try to channel financing towards the kind of businesses we need to occupy and populate our economies. If we're serious about these sorts of social ecological goals, we're going to need businesses that are owned differently, governed differently. And there are models and ideas. And in fact, I'll put a link into that policy tool that we created for policymakers to think about this as well, to create different kinds of funds, different kind of tax models, etc., to help transition and transfer business ownership, governance, and other enterprise designs into these. But it's the $1 million question. I think we just keep chipping away, trying to create the alternative and try to create a narrative shift at the same time that will hopefully lead to some significant policy shifts.
Thank you so much.
I think I might have missed a question in the chat, which was by Elisa, who was asking, have you ever had any discussion with owners, representatives of fossil fuel companies? And how, if so, how do they understand their role in overshooting planetary boundaries? How would they unlock transformative action? That's a hard question.
I mean, it's a hard question. I have a maybe simple answer, which is no. Like, we haven't engaged. We have to decide where our energy is best spent. There's a limited amount of time and energy, and we focus on where we think the levers of change can be most effective, where we can add value. But overall, I think it's an example of, when we ask the question, what do you need to stop doing, and what is your core purpose? It's the kind of thing that industry needs to transform completely and think of themselves as an energy company, not as a fossil fuel company. If you're providing energy, then let's provide energy in a way that is within the donut, and that's going to mean renewable energy. Hopefully will mean different ownership models and access to energy as well, because there's a social side of energy, and access to energy is important. Affordability of energy is important. So we're going to need to see some new designs emerge, I think, in that space. There have been some examples, like a Danish company that went from being a fossil fuels company to a renewable energy company. I'm not seeing a lot of appetite currently in the fossil fuel giants of our economy. So we haven't engaged with them. I don't think I think there's been one or two that wanted to do something with us, and we were overcommitted and we didn't at the time. But it's going to be a big transition, I think, for them. There's no point ignoring that elephant in the room that, this is uncomfortable, and you're going to need to completely shift who you are in order to become the kind of business that belongs to this future thriving, regenerative, distributed economy.
Yes, and following up on this, how do you work with businesses? Are you proactively trying to engage specific groups of businesses, or are businesses reaching out to you, or both?
Well, our model is, we don't want to be central to this. We're not going to run around talking to all the businesses of the world. There are tens of hundreds of millions of businesses. We're creating tools that consultants, communities, networks of businesses, business schools, others can use to engage businesses. And I think the majority of the change is happening through those change makers that are using the tools and taking it to their own community and network of businesses to help try to transform or bring about different enterprise designs. So our model is that we get a lot of requests from businesses to work with them, to do sessions with their board, to speak at their local, internal conferences, and we nearly always say no. We just don't have the time. We're focused in on creating tools and materials for others to then use so that we can reach many, many times more businesses rather than rely on us to be a direct service provider, I guess, to that.
Yes, I understand. And so a few more questions. You must be tired, Erinch. We're almost there.
No problem at all.
So next question is by Nia. I hope I'm pronouncing the name right. So Nia is asking two questions. The first one is Doughnut economics basically a firm organizational level economics, so on the micro level? And the second question, do you want to answer this first?
Just the first one, I mean, it's actually, even though what you heard from me is a very micro level of focus, the Doughnut economics, if you read the book, Doughnut Economics, 7 Ways to Think Like a 21st Century Economist by Kate Raworth, it's actually very macro. It's about as macro as it gets, I think, in terms of, looking at alternatives to focusing on growth, looking at ways of, redefining economics in a way that fits for the 21st century. So actually the very natural underpinnings of the concepts of Doughnut economics are incredibly macro. To bring it into the world of business, we've had to create new concepts that are micro. And yeah. Sorry, Roberta, the second part of the question.
Yeah, no, and I think this is the beauty of the Action Lab. We don't see many of these concepts being transformed into transformative action on the ground level. So I think this is really what at least I find really fascinating about the organization, is that taking the concept and then actually going, like applying it. So I find it really fascinating. And the second question was, you indicated that various companies participated in these workshops. Is there any specific context, like geographic, economic, or cultural, where these companies are coming from?
So I'll share this screen, which was where we had the different workshops listed from different organizations around the world. A lot of it was across Europe. I mean, naturally, there was a lot more interest across different parts of Europe, but pretty diverse from east to west, north to south. We sort of gotten a lot of it. There was some, in India, there was an Africa community. There was, some very large businesses. For instance, in the Basel area one, there were some very large pharmaceutical companies that joined. We did one that's, I have a non-disclosure agreement with a global multinational company, where we did a bespoke one to pilot and to test how it works with a global company. A lot of these were smaller. There was a bit of the increasing interest from startup incubators and startup accelerator programs and early stage businesses, some younger businesses. I think there was a lot of interest. There was a lot of interest from private companies, I would say, family businesses in particular. So that's, when I look across that list, I see a pretty broad range. I mean, ones like the British Retail Consortium, we're talking about the largest retail companies in the UK, for instance. But when we look at, for instance, other ones like Coest, which is a community of businesses in Sweden and Norway. When we look at other ones, was one from Italy. We did one as well. I can't remember. I'm not finding the name here at the moment. But yeah, it was a real mix. Purpose economy is very much the businesses that are focused on steward ownership. That was at a conference in Berlin, and we had businesses from around the world that were interested in that. They helped pilot this there. And we had other sort of UN programs like Accelerate 2030, which was a UN development program initiative that works on startups around the world, and other business acceleration programs around the world. So a real mix of different kind of organizations and businesses across all that. Yes, Changemakers magazine. Well, that was actually a lot of the co-op community in Italy that wanted to pilot this, and we did a 2-session online workshop series with them to pilot it. So it's a real mix, but overall, I'd say a bit more of a slant to startups, but not majority, but just slightly overrepresented, and definitely a slant towards Europe, despite there being representatives from around the world.
Yes, a real mix. And linked to this question, the following one is asking whether some countries or companies are more receptive or less receptive to this business model, if you have identified any pattern.
Very anecdotal, but I would say places where there is already a strong cooperative movement or a social enterprise movement and social solidarity economy, these questions feel a bit more natural. I would say in the Anglo-American world, where shareholder wealth maximization is maybe a bit more extreme in the way that corporate forms work, the way that regulations work, the way financial markets work, it's a harder sell. But even there, I mean, I live in the UK, so there's a little bit of additional interest because of just where we are located, and we don't want to fly anywhere because of carbon emissions. So we're trying to minimize that limits where we can go a little bit, except for the online workshops we did. But overall, even there, there's enough interest because people are realizing how extreme this model is and how much they're held back from doing the things that matter. So in terms of, I mean, patterns across countries, I would say that in every country that we did, there was enough of an appetite, but there's obviously a selection bias here. So companies turning up as well and signing up to do this are the ones that are interested in these ideas and interested in looking at some more ambitious questions.
Wonderful. Our next question is from Francesca. I'll read it, Francesca, but if you want to mute, just let me know. Otherwise, I'll read it myself. So the question is, have recent crises, especially COVID and the war, affected negatively these discourses? I see less interest in these issues and alternatives over the last few years. Is this just my impression?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I think I've observed some additional short-term pressure. You know, of course, I was leading the World Fair Trade Organization when COVID hit. I was the chief executive, and we, you know, had 400 social enterprises around the world, and they all went into crisis. You know, it was a survival crisis. When you've got a survival crisis happening because of the crises, external crises happening, sometimes you look more short term, you look at commercial things, you just want to get the revenue, the turnover, so that you can stay solvent and you can keep paying your workers. And, you know, so it's a very, I agree that creates a pressure of survival. And this is a very long-term perspective. So it's a little bit of a luxury maybe to be able to step back and think about your enterprise design and the kind of changes that are needed in that situation. But at the same time, the crises also demonstrated the need for this, you know, among businesses. So once, you know, they got used to dealing with the crisis, I think there was also an interest from some of the key ones to really begin to look at this and realize, actually, these 20th century designs that we've taken into the 21st century are not really able to deal with crises effectively. They can't create the kind of partnerships you need. They can't create the kind of long-term focus and investment that you need. They have severe limitations for the business as well, for the resilience of the business. When I was in the World Fair Trade Organization, we did some research with the University of York and University of Cambridge, Helen Hoare and Bob Dougherty, that looked at the enterprises across that organization and that membership. And what we found is that they were 4 times more likely to survive than regular SMEs. That doesn't mean that they are making more money, but they're more resilient. They stick around longer when the crisis hits. They don't asset strip. They don't shut down because actually, I can sell this equipment and I'll have more money and I'll invest somewhere else. The businesses sort of stick around and more resilient longer term. If you're interested in that, there's a website, wfto.com/join the business revolution. I'll put that link as well in the chat. But it was a realization that actually, to deal with crises, we also need to think, how do we design businesses and populate our economies with the kind of designs of businesses that are able to navigate the trade-offs in the right way during those crises.
Wonderful. Thank you. I think, Valentina, I was wondering whether you would be okay to unmute and say hi. You say it would be nice to build impactful networks, and we're very happy to do so. This is what these seminars are about. So if you're still here, if you would like to unmute and say hi, please feel free to do so. You also have another question in the chat, I think, related to startups and incubators. So if you want, please feel free to ask it directly. Not sure if Valentina is still with us. Probably not, but the question was whether you have been also targeting startups and incubators.
Absolutely, we are. We created this tool so that they can integrate it into their work. So impact hubs and others that are doing startup work are beginning to say, oh, okay, actually, we can take startups through this journey. We can take them through a journey of asking these kinds of questions.
Wonderful. Okay, so we have arrived to the end of the chat question. This is the first time we had so many questions in chat. Usually we have just like direct questions. This is the first time we had so many in the chat. So I was wondering if there's anyone else that wanted to ask a question to Erinch, or we can wrap up. Yeah, I cannot see anyone. Okay, so I have one last final question, if you don't mind. My last one was just about impact. So I was wondering whether you have any way of measuring or assessing the impact that these tools are making, or it's just to disperse and there's no way. So how do you work with impact?
Yeah, I mean, we have and I'll put a link into this, because we grappled with this a lot. Of course, a lot of people wanted to create what we call company donuts. So they wanted to say, oh, let's measure our impact and use donut methodology as a way to map and to kind of look at our broader social and ecological impacts, because it's compelling for, you know, countries or at a planetary level to do this at a very macro level. We have a policy on this, which I just pasted, and we try to explain our reasons why we say don't do company donuts. We ask that, but firstly, a lot of the methodologies used to try to allocate to companies the current planetary boundaries and say, okay, Coca-Cola, this is how much carbon you should emit. This is how much, you know, biodiversity loss you should generate. They use a concept called grandfathering. So they preference the largest companies that exist today over maybe companies of the future that don't exist yet or that are very small currently. So they allocate based on size one way or another. Also, we have issues with equity and equitability within that, because when we downscale the donut to a place-based formulation, so into a city, for instance, we can say that city has got 4 million population, it's 4 million out of the global 8 billion. We can say on an equality basis, every human's got the same right to those planet's boundaries, and we can do a national donut, for instance, or even a city donut. A company doesn't represent a group of people. You know, some people work in it, some people supply to it, some people buy its products, some people do, you know, have other relationships with the company, some people benefit from the taxes maybe it pays. But how do you, as Roberta, allocate your human individual planetary footprint allocation to companies? And if you do it based on purchasing, then again, like, how would that be monitored? So even on climate, this is really difficult, and we have misgivings about how it's done. On the other planetary boundaries, it's even harder to determine, you know, biodiversity loss. What is the right amount of biodiversity loss a company should be allowed? And then looking at the distinction between social and ecological is even harder. Going, okay, what if you create more employment? What if you create more employment for marginalized people? Like, what is, you know, does that mean that you can have greater carbon footprint? You know, the dynamics are so complex that to go down a path where we think we could scientifically do this properly for each company that currently exists or companies that don't even exist yet in the future is problematic for us. So we say, please don't use a donut for this purpose. We don't think it works with the values. And instead of saying, what is the minimum a company should do? We say, what is the maximum a company could do? And how could we unlock the maximum it could do by designing the company differently? So our perspective on impact and impact measurement is less about figuring out what is the right amount or creating ways to quantify things more effectively. There's lots of organizations, methodologies that do that. That's great. They should do that. And people should use those methodologies. But the principles of donut economics don't quite work for doing it using the donut in that way. So we say instead, focus on what is the maximum you could do. And then let's unlock the actions you'll need to take anyway on that impact. And let's unlock them by designing into your business the kind of attributes that will enable you to pursue those strategies, actions that will create the most benefit possible for society and the planet.
Yes, absolutely. It's very much a visualization exercise and imaginative exercise. Well, thank you so much, Erinch. It was amazing to have you here. We're all very happy to know more about the Doughnut Economics Action Lab now, and I'll definitely use it more. I teach the Doughnut Economics in all my units, but now I'll try to figure out whether I can also use the tools. So really happy.
Wonderful. And just a reminder, that there is this LinkedIn group that I posted at the top as well. So if you are interested in bringing this into business education in any way, do join that group that I posted above as well. But of course, yeah, do also join Doughnut Economics Action Lab's platform, where we've got lots of change makers working with this at city level, at neighborhood level, at country level, working on research, working on other things. So yeah, I would invite you all to sort of be a part of that community.
Wonderful. I just joined the group, so yes, it will happen. Thank you so much. And I think we can wrap it up for today. Really great to have you here and hope to see you in person again soon. And thank you so much to all my colleagues, and we'll meet again with the seminars next month. So thank you again and have a lovely evening. Thank you, Erinch.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Bye.